So, getting a little crazy. So we're going to transition to 22 and page 22, where we talk specifically, if I'm guessing off of the photos, baseball. So we talked about the experiences of segregation in the military. We talked about experiences of segregation on Pepper Street. And now we're going to get more into the baseball aspect, the beginning of the shifts in baseball. Okay. So we're going to do 22 through 25 today. And our two Post-its are going to be Jackie's baseball experience in general. And then we're going to get more specific on the qualities of baseball, like what was baseball like in the 1940s. So, 1940s, yeah. A changing world. After the Army, Dad worked for a year as a coach at Houston Tillotson College in Austin, Texas. Teachers mess up words too. He then played baseball in the Negro Leagues for one season in 1945. That was the only league open to African American ball player at the time. Between 1888 and 1947, here's some history of baseball, black ball players were restricted to the Negro Leagues. Restricted. Must stay here. There's a restriction. The Negro Leaguers played a unique and exciting style of baseball and entertained millions in small towns and big cities across America. Negro League teams gave us great players such as Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Willie Mays, and Henry Hank Aaron. Despite the glory associated with the Negro League baseball, it was still part of a discriminatory system. Major League Baseball had an unwritten policy that kept non-white players out of unorganized baseball. There's that unwritten thing again. It was kind of like my assignment where you looked over my essay on Kenny Washington and how the NFL had an unwritten rule that African Americans could not play football. It's the same kind of thing here. Black ball players were denied the opportunity to play in the major leagues. Salaries were lower in the Negro Leagues, the schedules were less structured, and when the teams traveled south, they were forced to follow Jim Crow laws. Those are great points for baseball experience and qualities of baseball in the U.S. Because of its inequities, Dad questioned his future in professional baseball. Although my dad knew that the black press, some liberal sports writers, and a few politicians were fighting for an end to Jim Crow baseball, he had little faith that it would happen in his lifetime. Little did Dad know that change was close, or that he was the prime candidate to break down the racial barrier. So he didn't even realize that he was going to be a major part of the shifts. The end of World War II signaled a turning point in America in many ways. Segregation was one area that was certain to change. The Black veterans returning from World War II were more determined than ever to abolish segregation. And I'd like us to pause and think about, after African Americans go to war and fight for their country, why, when they return, would they be more determined to change their country? Think about fighting for something you believe in, but the very thing you're fighting for, you don't believe in all of it. Or maybe there's things that you're not so proud of. And then, so you return from fighting for this country and maybe it's time to fix things. So why are they more determined after fighting for the country? Other people were just as interested in desegregating civilian life. Some of them I missed a sentence. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman announced an end to segregation in the U.S. military. So that was first to go. Other people were just as interested in segregating civilian life. Civilian is like just you and me, citizens, not war people. Some of them started with sports. Because of its significance to American culture, baseball was the first team sport targeted for change. So I could flip that as a question. Why was baseball one of the biggest, earliest things to start shifting and change. And you would be able to go to paragraph 1, 2, 3, line 1, because of its significance to American culture. Everybody was obsessed with it. So why not start with the thing that has everyone's attention? American baseball, which grew out of British ball and stick games like crickets and rounders, gained in popularity during the Civil War. By the end of the war, baseball was considered America's pastime, which we still mention that term today. It seemed to represent all that was considered good about America: democracy, teamwork, fair play. Well, maybe not fair in terms of who's playing. Excellence. It also represented America at its worst. What did I just say? Divided, discriminatory, unjust. Those are qualities for your poster. 24. Huge image and a timeline. Determine and institutionalize discrimination in baseball. Sports writers such as Wendell Smith of the Pittsburgh Courier, Frank A. Young of the Chicago Defender, Art Cohen from the Oakland Tribune, Sam Lacey of the Baltimore Afro-Americans, and Shirley Povich of the Washington Post wrote daily articles on the injustice of segregation within professional sports. They appealed to the baseball commissioner, to the owners of teams, to the ball players themselves, and to fans who supported the game. By appealing to them, that means they have a certain audience in mind. Like, we want to change something, so we need to write with a purpose to get in their head, to change their mind, give them the good facts, the reasons. Our opinions need to be sound and relevant and strong, with the evidence just as strong. So we talk about, why do we write certain things? These journalists had to write in a specific way for a specific purpose to get their point across. So with certain questions, as it says on page 24, last paragraph, the questions these journalists raised went beyond the issue of race and into the economics of the game, the money of baseball. They asked, could baseball truly be considered America's pastime when black ball players and white ball players couldn't play on the same field? Could post-war World War II teams afford to rebuild and be successful without including the enormous talent pool that existed within the Negro Leagues? Could the business of baseball grow when it was being accused of racism? Could the United States really consider itself a democracy if a portion of its population were denied basic human rights and opportunities simply because of the color of their skin? These are awesome questions for writers to, we're talking about baseball, but we're also talking about, if baseball is the representation and it's America's pastime, there's not a lot of things that are showcasing America in a good light when we're talking about baseball. So let's take a peek at the timeline. Let's see if it gives us any new information. So 1845 box is telling us about the history of baseball. The first recorded game, is played on June 19th, 1846 at Elysian Fields in Hoboken, New Jersey. I did not know that, where the New York Knickerbockers lost to the New York Baseball Club. So if you go down this timeline, we're learning about things that are not mentioned in the text because they're not maybe as important of a detail or as relevant to Sharon Robinson's point. But even though she doesn't type it in paragraph form, she does think it's relevant and important enough to be included in the book. So she puts that in like a little mini history lesson in timeline format. So we could take a minute, and you could totally use the timeline stuff to put qualities and experience of baseball in your post-its. So my takeaways here from this that we can discuss is going to be, first, Jackie did not think he was the one that was going to change things. He was upset about it. He was kind of maybe thinking of walking away from baseball. We learned about the differences in the Negro League and the major leagues. We learned that journalists were a huge part in demanding the answers to these questions and shifting the change. So that is pretty interesting that, they use their voice. They're not baseball players. Maybe they didn't even like the game, but they saw an injustice and decided to do something about it and use their voice and be heard and publish their words to signal and start a change.